Morning, everyone. Joe Waxman here. And in this video, I want to look at the chart of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Don't forget to hit the like button, guys, please. Helps me out a lot. And subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, FDR. FDR, he was president during the Great Depression and through World War II. He died shortly before the bombing, so he was not responsible for the bombing. That was Truman. But he was elected 4 terms to president, so he was served the most presidential terms out of anyone, I believe. And I think they changed that after him, some point after him, because you can only do 2 terms now. But he was elected for 4 terms, so he was very popular. Right. In any case, he has his Sun conjunct Venus in Aquarius in the 5th house, approaching the 6th house, but more 5th. Excuse me. And Sun conjunct Venus, as you know, hopefully, maybe, produces a very nice personality, but can trouble the Venusian ruled houses, as well as the Venusian ruled triplicity, which would be in the night chart. It is the Earth and water houses. I'm not going to go too much into detail, just to note that it can damage it. Venus is damaged by the sun in proximity when it's combust, more so than Mercury, because Venus is much more it's less, has less resistance to the sun, but does create a very nice personality, very beautiful, very artistic. All the Venusian qualities become infused in the sun. I have it. It is weakening to the sun potentially. There needs to be other mitigating factors. Ideally a strong Mars, which he has, very much so, and I'll get to that. But it can be a bit like Sun in Libra, where the sun loses kind of directional strength, you could say, or because the sun is the ego, and it rules the sort of individuation of the personality. It's all about the self with the sun, and Venus is too much about people pleasing and wanting to be nice and wanting to accommodate. But in any case, and especially with a man, Sun conjunct Venus can really show that he can lose strength to women or his vices. He can become too lazy, too Venusian, too just seeking joy and pleasure, which is Venus, materialism. But in any case, 5th house is quite good for a lot of things. Early education, fun, game, performance, recognition, confidence. That's just trying to the 1st house. So it's like a secondary self house, house of self. 1st, 5th, and 9th are all sort of, you could say, like, well, 1st is obviously the house of self, but 5th and 9th are also derivatives of the self, you could say. They have an aspect to the self. So they're very strong in many ways. Aquarius additionally has the benefit of thinking about society. So especially for a politician, Aquarius can is an obvious sign that brings a person into the political mindset, as well as 4th house and Cancer. He's a Cancer moon, because then you're bringing in the idea of the homeland, and that is what politicians generally represent. It's the homeland. So 4th house, moon, Cancer, 11th house, Aquarius, things of that nature. That definitely can point to somebody who's politically minded and thinking about society and the home and protection of the home and these sort of things. So yeah, moon in Cancer is very strong. That's the strongest planet because it's very high in the sky in the 10th house. Also, he was a Democrat president, and he was famous for his New Deal during the Depression, which was an expansion of government and its policies, and very, very it attempted to stimulate the economy through governmental programs, which I can understand the reasoning behind it. However, I also have a lot of problems with personally the expansion of government, because a very powerful big government is dangerous in its own right, and a lot of the things that were instituted in the New Deal were never taken away. They just sort of remain there, and were used against the people eventually, inevitably, uh, in many ways. I mean, just one example is the Social Security, which is bankrupt. He instituted Social Security, but they looted the Social Security that Americans paid for. And so what good is it if they're just going to take the power that you know, obtain in times of crisis and take advantage of it, never give back that power, and use it against the people? Now Social Security is bankrupt, and they've stolen the money that Americans have paid into it. And now we have to crash the economy and create a world war in order to avoid coming to terms with the fact that, they ruined everything, including, Social Security and the dollar and everything else. I mean, so I'm not a huge fan of this, but it did seem to help. I'm not sure, but it's speculative because we don't know what other measures could have helped potentially even more in the long run. So it's like, well, it helped, yeah. Or I mean, it's like, okay, we survived the Great Depression and things did get better, but that's not necessarily an excuse for big, expanded, bloated government and the welfare state, and giving just all an all powerful government that gives handouts to everyone and controls everything. It's just the way it's been done. That's not an excuse for anything. But in any case, he did have his moon in Cancer in the 10th house. So publicly, he's very, motherly, nurturing, moony, can, wanting to care for the people. And his moon is, that's evident there. But moon, I don't think is necessarily the best. And in fact, it's not, they say in astrology, in the 10th house. Mars is. Mars is great in the 10th house. That's where my Mars is. Conjunct the MC, with the same Mars. They say directionally, moon is much better in the 4th house, where it can focus its efforts much more squarely at home. Home is where the heart is. It's not a really prominent place for the moon, but nonetheless, that's where it was. And then if you look at moon has a moon actually has a yod towards it with the North Node and Venus, which is, and the North Node also has a yod, but a yod is considered finger of God, and it's two inconjuncts or quincunxes as they're called, pointing to the, how is this? That's a wide, oh yeah, 6 degrees. Sorry, looking at the wrong 6, 7, 6. Yeah. That's a strong node. I don't know. Some people might not count the North Node in the yod, but it is what it is. And so individually, it would mean that the sun is in poor aspect to Venus. It is the moon is 6th from Venus, and Venus is 8th from the moon. So there's a conflict between his emotional needs and his joy, and also how he treats women, because these are both feminine planets. So one of the things you can take away from this is that he married one of his cousins, which is odd enough. By the way, he comes from a powerful family. Theodore Roosevelt was already president. He was a cousin, and Delano were also family. His family lineage was very powerful, and Delano was another power. They were both rich, powerful families from New York. So he was born into sort of the upper class, had money from the get-go, and he married one of his cousins twice removed. I don't know, fifth cousin twice removed. I don't know, once removed, something like that. Who was already a Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. But he had many affairs. That's Venus, and so his wife never forgave him. They were estranged, but they kept the marriage going for political reasons and probably for financial reasons, I guess, on her part. I don't know. But anyway, they lived separately, which you can see here. He's very close with his girlfriends, but very distant from his moon is generally mother. But here I'm taking it to be wife, or just in general, the two aspects of his feminine nature are at odds with each other. In his own life, that would show that his emotional needs and his what he enjoys doing are at odds with each other and conflictual. And well, also that his north node, as he gets older, it's somehow conflicted with his own emotional needs as well. And that also ties in to this Saturn, which is sextile the moon. So Saturn is supporting the moon, but it's square with Venus, and it's in conjunct with the north node. And then north node and Venus are sextile each other. So you can see this kind of strange pattern here. Saturn and Venus are in a mutual reception. So this square is mitigated between Venus and Saturn because of the mutual reception. It's still a square, which is let's see, Saturn is ruling fifth and sixth houses. So having to do with, the dispositor of the Sun and Venus, but also like romance, fun and games, and conflict, health, things of that nature are at odds. Here with his joy and habits, and he did get into a lot of trouble with his romances, his affairs, as well as his health, and that you could say is tied to his habits, his indulgences, his joyful practices that he got used to throughout his life. Obviously, we can tell that he's probably going to have health issues because his ascendant lord Mercury is in the sixth house, and it is square with Pluto, and that is exactly square, and that is not a good combination. Sixth house ascendant lord Mercury square Pluto, and he developed what they called polio, but I mean, polio, as far as I've researched, is just kind of like a general term for a lot of diseases. Later, I mean, I don't know later at what point they said it was also Guillain-Barré syndrome, however you pronounce that. So, they like to claim that they eradicated polio, but the same diseases were not eradicated and are still in existence today by other names, such as Guillain-Barré syndrome. And I think there are other names for similar polio-like illnesses that attack the nervous system. Mercury in Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, co-ruler, as well as Saturn. Uranus is on the ascendant, indicating potential nerve problems. I also have Uranus on the ascendant. It's not ruling the sixth house cusp, but I do have nerve problems, sciatica mainly, which is very weak nervous system because it's overstimulated by Uranus. So Uranus on the ascendant or conjunct the ascendant lord can show that. Robin Williams had Uranus conjunct his ascendant lord, and he developed nerve problems, nervous system disorder. And as well, Mercury can also represent the nervous system and Aquarius as well. So in the sixth house, that's very, I mean, we're seeing multiple indications that he could suffer major nervous system problems with the Mercury being in the ascendant lord in Aquarius in the sixth house, perfectly square to Pluto. Any planet that's square to Pluto is going to suffer a lot. Without, I mean, that's pretty much, you know, Pluto conjunct or square or in any other bad aspect is opposition. That's really difficult. Probably one of the most difficult. Right. So there is a lot of indications that he would suffer nerve damage to a degree. Uranus conjunct the ascendant also shows great independence, rebellious nature, brilliant idea man, individual, like, you know, lots of ideas, and he showed like the New Deal, like it was tremendous. It was whether you agree with it or not, it was a tremendous effort. There were so many parts to the New Deal, and a lot of that was, you know, this Uranus on the ascendant and 3 planets in Aquarius gave him this very active mind. Sixth house is also very critical. So Mercury in Aquarius in the sixth house is going to it's going to be very sharp, very intellectually sharp, right? Not good for health, but, you know. He started out as a lawyer, but he didn't like law. He moved into politics right after. Harvard graduate, so very intelligent. And here we have a whole stellium in the 8th, moving into the 9th house. Pluto's in the 9th house. The 9th house cusp is at 22 degrees Taurus. So Chiron, Jupiter, and then it's even pulling in Neptune. Saturn's more 8th house. But interestingly enough, Saturn in the 8th house is supposed to be good for longevity, and he did not live long life. He died in his 60s from some brain hemorrhage or something like that. He had a terrible headache, and then he died. So, you know, as far as it being in the 8th house, it's definitely pulling into the 9th house. All these planets are 8th, pulling in 8th, mixing 8th and 9th house. But Pluto is definitely more in the 9th house. So 9th house is much more relating to higher education, law, and, you know, law, I mean, not necessarily law, but if we look here with the South Node in Mercury, South Node in Gemini, pretty much in the 9th house. And then Mercury in Aquarius in the 6th house. 6th house is, you know, a very competitive house. And you can see law from the 6th house as well as the 9th house. So we're getting that indication here, but it pulled more towards thinking the big picture about society and towards politics. Partly because the moon in Cancer, so he, instead of being a lawyer, he wants to protect his homeland. So I'm getting a call here. But also this Mars, I want to show you something. This Mars is stationary. It's a very powerful Mars, not by sign, but by accidental dignity and by being stationary. So he has this very rebellious quality. And not only rebellious, very, very courageous. I mean, funny enough, this is similar to mine. I mean, different signs, but I have Uranus conjunct the ascendant and Mars conjunct the MC. Mars is his 8th house lord and 3rd house lord. So communication, writing, not necessarily speaking, that's going with his sun. So that's, you know, the speaking is strong, but the communication and 8th house dealing with power and control. And behind the scenes, it's not a very above the scenes kind of house, but it is it's a very deep and aware house. A warehouse. It's not a warehouse, it's an aware house. It's aware of deep things, psychology, secrets, hidden agendas, seeing beneath the scenes, and having a very good grasp of underlying causes of things, because you're digging deep, right? In Gemini. So this is a very intellectually capable and courageous person who can really face, because Mars in the 10th is like, you're bringing, not only will you fight for your career, but you can fight the public, because this is the public. And so he can fight for what he needs to fight for. He can be very courageous, especially with the third house. Third house is a house of courage, whereas eighth house is a house of depth. And Mars is a planet of, sorry, Mars is a planet of initiation, courage, aggression, and the warrior spirit. And it being stationary means it's even more potent, more strong. So he's very courageous, right? Very bold. He's the man to get the job done, and people will naturally have faith in him because of his very bold, strong Mars. Of course, it's you know, and then well, this moon's in good dignity, right? So it's like he's bold and strong, especially in his expression. You know, it's ruling the third house and it's in Gemini, so very bold expression, ability to give these, you know, inspiring speeches and inspire strength. And so during he was a leader during the Great Depression, which he needed to be a strong leader, and during World War II, right? So he needs this. And eighth house is, again, brings that depth of understanding, and third house brings the courageous expression. And then eighth and ninth house with all these planets together. I mean, to be honest, this is kind of confusing because Jupiter is with Neptune, and I was trying to figure out like exactly what this means. Jupiter, Chiron, Neptune. Jupiter is his belief, his enthusiasm, his faith, his religion, his philosophy. I mean, it could also definitely pertains to law. So we're seeing that signification. Neptune is very expanded. They both co-rule Pisces, which is the seventh house for him. So there's some one thing you can say is that seventh lord in the eighth house does indicate affairs, right? And he had affairs. He had several affairs. Right? It wasn't just one. It was multiple affairs. So there is eighth house influence here, right? And what else? I mean, there is a certain death of the marriage. That can also be his wife didn't actually die, but the marriage did, pretty much. So that's interesting. Neptune and Jupiter is very expansive, right? Jupiter expands. Neptune really kind of obliterates and just dissolves. So there's an element of dissolving the marriage, but Saturn, which is a little further away, Saturn solidifies and crystallizes. So, which is interesting because their marriage did last. It just wasn't a healthy marriage. They lived separately and she never forgave him. He even tried to get her back and she wouldn't forgive him. Right? So this complicated thing. And then Chiron's even here, very close to Jupiter. Chiron, you know, I like to think of Chiron with Jupiter as having this belief in the underprivileged class, because Chiron represents the wounded reject, and as well as healing and teaching. So it's adding to a certain level of wisdom that Jupiter already has, as well as an understanding for the underprivileged, which is interesting because he had multiple. I mean, there were a lot of stuff going on. It was very complicated. There was the internment of the Japanese during World War II after Pearl Harbor, which is understandable, but he received a lot of backlash and criticism for that, for turning on his own people, which happened to be of Japanese descent. And then again, he was already dead by the time that they dropped the atomic bomb, so you can't blame him for that. However, just a quick note on that. I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but Japan aligning themselves with Hitler was a seriously bad move for Japan. And I hate the idea of the atomic bomb on the citizens of Japan, but the Japanese government really screwed up. Like that was really, really, really heinous move to join with the Nazis who were killing Jews and gypsies and other people that whoever they didn't like, they killed. So it wasn't just Jews, but it was ugly, horribly ugly. So yeah, the citizens of Japan did not deserve it, and neither did the Japanese citizens of America. They did not deserve it either. However, they had some, they unfortunately the decisions of the Japanese government were attached to the Japanese citizens and the Japanese citizens of Japan and the Japanese descendants in America. Anyway, that was unfortunate. And so, yeah, eighth house influences are still there because it's tying him into all these death associations. And you have to remember that any association with Scorpio or the eighth house or Pluto, it's going to bring about not necessarily death to that person. Well, everyone dies, and yes, so death to the person, but it's going to bring death near that person, right? People with Scorpio and eighth house have associations with death and crisis and war and all of these things, right? It just happens automatically. They attract it. And I don't want to go into detail. I mean, I'm sure you can come up with your own stories. Just generally speaking, I have my own experiences. Scorpio themes draw in, Scorpio associations draw in Scorpio themes. So people with eighth house influence do get a heavier dose of death and crisis and things like that. So he is bringing in the eighth house and Pluto to his life. What else? I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of things. Well, North Node, Sagittarius, so they're bringing in that eighth house theme, but also Jupiter is ruling the fourth house. So early on, higher education, ninth house. You could say ninth, 10th. So like law school, higher education. It wasn't very religious or philosophical as far as I know. It went more in the direction of higher education, especially with Gemini. And then career, and then going more towards Jupiter, third, fourth house in the eighth, ninth house, right? With all these planets here. And yeah, so politics. Right. What else? And then there's this Yod. Yods I started to touch on that before, but Yods are considered fingers of God. They supposedly represent some sort of fate, right? Fated something or other. So you could say like the moon and its north node are receiving some sort of fate from, Venus is ruling the second house and the ninth house. I don't know, it gets kind of complicated because the node doesn't rule any planet, but it's disposited by Jupiter. You could just generally say like look at the moon and Cancer in the 10th house and just be like, well, yeah, okay, Democrat, New Deal, all that. Anyway, let's see what else. I mean, this Pluto really just has this main. Hang on, phone call. Main square to Mercury, and that's difficult. We pull in his draconic chart. Here you're seeing all this 12th house leading to first house. I mean, Pluto's pretty much right on the ascendant. So that indicates a lot of power and control and plutonic themes, like I was just saying. War and death and crisis and transformation. And if you think about his rule, he served 4 terms, which is definitely powerful as president, and the Great Depression and World War II. That's pretty heavy stuff right there. And then 12th house is really interesting because often there's a lot of 12th house themes with politicians. Again, dealing with similar things of the 8th house, secrecy, foreign nations, foreign connections, and it's leading into the first house, but it's that secret, hidden, subconscious influence. A lot of things in politics are behind closed doors, so you need to have those hidden realms activated. Otherwise, you're never going to get on the inside of the closed door secret clubs that have the power. Remember, the 12th house is they considered a malefic house, but 12th house is the house of the subconscious. And if you understand psychology, we are run by our subconscious. So translate that, the 12th house in many ways is more powerful than the first house. Just think about that. In the same way that the subconscious runs us, runs our life, even though the first house is the house of consciousness. 12th house is in many ways more powerful. Mars is in Libra here, and Moon together with Moon in the second house. Yeah, but it's not conjunct any planets, so minor significance. Let's see here. Here we have 4th house, ascendant, and Uranus. North node in the 7th. Venus here is conjunct Pluto. So there's something very deadly about this Venus. Affairs and indulgences, that may have contributed to his early demise and ill health. The habits that he engaged in, and also showing that Venus for a man could bring about deep crisis and transformation. Really don't know, but it was an issue for him, having these affairs, losing the trust and faith of his wife, and things of that nature. Venus is in Taurus, so that's quite good. And Venus is ruling the second house. And so finances, security, as well as speech, and also what he eats. This is a multiple signification of the food he eats because it's Venus in Taurus and ruling the second house, as well as the 9th house. So there's some, he might have just had a really bad habit of drinking and eating things that were unhealthy for him. Mercury is very prominent here, conjunct the MC, Mercury in Gemini. So that's excellent for thinking, communication, the intellect, and managerial type stuff. Right. So very relevant, very clever. Both Mercury's and air signs, so very intelligent man, no doubt. Let's have a look at the nodes. Okay. Getting some little third, fourth house activation here with south node of Mercury and Mars conjunct the north node, widely conjunct, so not that relevant. A lot of doesn't have any planets in Capricorn, so we're going to skip over that. Venus conjunct, well, more like the Sun conjunct the south node of Neptune in Aquarius. More indication that possibly he had overindulgence because Neptune, Neptune has, I don't know if he drank a lot, but if he did, it was definitely bad for him. With planets in Aquarius, with the nervous system, he might have had a drinking habit. He might have just been overindulgent because Neptune as well just expands and makes things very delusional. This is going to be draining on his life force already with Venus here. And the Sun represents vitality and life force. So it's a draining influence having south node of Neptune there. And potentially delusional in some ways. Overly imaginative. Mercury's conjunct its own north node, so I think that would actually be excellent for the expansion of his mercurial mind, making him even more, inventive, active. Mercury, brilliant, very good thinker. Can skip over some of these because they don't seem relevant. North node of Uranus conjunct the south node, the moon. That's interesting. Shows that he was very progressive, and that's what they called the Democrats, progressives. Uranus is the planet of progress, right? Uranus on the ascendant, Uranus, north node of Uranus conjunct the south node. Shows that early in his life, he was interested in progress, in forwarding the direction of society and technology and things of that nature. By the way, it doesn't have to associate itself with, for instance, I'm highly critical of those so-called modern liberal ideologies leaning towards socialism and welfare state and the expansion of governments, but my Uranus is in a different sign. But anyway, that does relate here, especially in Gemini. It's very progressive, expansive, forward moving. And the liberal ideology is more because of his moon is so prominent in Cancer in the 10th house. And then it's conjunct Jupiter's north node in Cancer, and then widely conjunct Pluto and Saturn's north node. So he's very much for the forward movement of society in the heartfelt sense of women's liberation and caring, compassion. And I'm not against all that. All those things are good. I just think there's far better ways to do that. Again, this is just an opportunity for me to insert my opinion here. Not that it matters astrologically, but I'm opinionated. I'm a Gemini, conjunct Venus. So I'm going to tell you my opinion, whether you like it or not. You're just going to have to deal with it. It's not relevant to astrology, but it's relevant to me as an astrologer. So you get my opinion whether you want to or not. Anyway, he's very much for moving society forward in the directions that it needs to go, whether for good or bad. I mean, there are better ways to do it, in my opinion, but he did it in that way, and that's fine. It is what it is, right? Let's see. Uranus has a really nice. Forgot even to mention this trine between Chiron and Jupiter. So his ideas are very, it's carrying his belief system is carrying forward this Uranian um vibe. Uranus is very much, like I said, progressive, but it's really about the now. It's about not following, being independent. And so he's just not going to follow anyone. He's just going to do his own thing. He's going to follow his beliefs, and his beliefs are going to be very Uranian and Neptunian also. Neptunian also is the Neptune is the planet of compassion, spiritual planet, so he's bringing in a lot of different things, into his belief system. Eighth house, ninth house themes, Neptune, Chiron, and Uranus, and Taurus. So very practical, finance. He's trying to combine all these different things into his Jupiter, that's the fourth house lord and his north node, dispositor. So that's really the center of his, well, you could say Jupiter, Mars, and Moon, also Sun and Venus as well, and Mercury. But yeah, they're all combining together to create FDR. And I hope I didn't miss any of the main points. Yeah, I think I covered the most of it. So that's FDR. I think most people are just like, I haven't heard too much criticisms of FDR. I think most people are generally in favor of him, despite him being a raging Democrat. I mean, we'll forgive him for that because it was too early on to know that the Democrat Party is the party of Satan. I mean, so is the Republicans these days, pretty much, but more, the Democrat Party is more, who cares? Whatever. I mean, not who cares. A lot of people care. Anyway, guys, I don't want to ramble on. So hit the like button, please. Do me a favor. Subscribe if you haven't already. Book a reading with me. Otherwise, maybe I'll just be homeless soon because I'm running out of money and I can't find a job. But if you want to keep seeing me online, book a reading with me. And go to my website, macroastrology.com. Email me at macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. And leave a comment if you like. And I'll see you again soon. All right, thanks, bye.